Barely a month to the inauguration of Bola Ahmed Tinubu as the next Nigerian president, one of his most vocal spokespersons has revealed the list of potential ministers has been kept away from non-party members. Tinubu, president-elect, and members of the ruling All Progressive Congress are, however, compelled to name the ministers within 60 days of resuming office, according to a bill signed into law in March by President Muhammadu Buhari. The bill compels the president and state governors to announce members of their cabinet within the first 60 days of the resumption. As Nigerians wait for the list, some names have been suggested as potential members of the incoming president's cabinet. Now, joining me tonight to discuss this topic, I have Kingsley Chime, a public affairs analyst and a legal practitioner. A warm welcome to you, Kingsley, and thanks for joining us on the program. Now, what inspired the passing of this bill that mandates the submission of a list of nominees for ministers and commissioners for states within 60 days of taking office by the president and governors-elect?
Thank you, Gbenga, for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Let me begin by saying that it appears to be ironical that the current government, President Muhammadu Buhari, would want to leave a legacy of what he did not achieve. We are witnesses in this country in 2015 when it took APC almost about 6 months before they could nominate their ministerial list. So at that time, there were outcries as to the time it has taken the president to nominate and set up his government. You know, perhaps that may have influenced the need for the president to engineer this bill to see that the next president will be able to set up his cabinet within 6 months of inauguration. But much as one would applaud such bill or action of the government, it is more importantly is the need to have credible and more efficient people being nominated or appointed, be it at the federal or state levels. Of course, the National Assembly and of course the State House of Assembly has the legislative competence, you know, to legislate on issues of this. I think it was part of the amendment process in the Constitution, particularly Section 147, as it has to do with federal ministerial appointment, and 192 with respect to the state commissioner's appointment. So it's quite important that government sets up its government quite early in the government and be able to, you know, set off as quickly as possible so that we wouldn't have a repeat of what happened in 2015.
Now, we've seen governors and presidents in the time past, they try to test laws. Is there any provision in the bill that talks about consequences of not doing this, failure to appoint ministers or your commissioners in 60 days? What happens?
That is actually one of the loopholes in the Constitution. And I do not think, even though I have not read the bill or that intends to alter those provisions, but going by what is originally there, it has no consequences. It's actually only trying to direct the minds of the government. You know, the Constitution provides that you have to appoint your ministers and the commissioners. And of course, if you look at Section 14, sub 3, it also recommended that in your appointment, you also take into consideration the geopolitical spread. So much as we have seen over the years that successive governments do not follow the letters of the law, you know, verbatim et ceteratim, but the latest amendment to the Constitution is also just to direct the mind of the court. I do not think there's any consequence for not appointing ministers or commissioners within 60 days.
Now, Kingsley, let's look at the background to all of this. What happens when, you know, the state governors of the president, they know they're contesting for elections, there's a campaign period, and everybody contests to win. So, and even after results are announced, there's quite a window between the election results and swearing in. So what does it take to appoint ministers and commissioners? What's the lobbying process like? And is it such a tedious thing that Nigeria's outgoing president spent 166 days, 6 months, like you rightly said in your opening statement, to make appointments?
Well, as far as the law is concerned, the only requirement for you to be appointed, either a minister or commissioner, is at the time of appointment, you must be qualified to be a legislator, either at the federal or the state levels. There's no other qualification or requirement, required by law. So if you see the time it takes, maybe the governors or president to appoint people in government, is not necessarily about the competence or the capability of those people. It's actually, they're trying to appoint those who would, play by their own rules.
Political
of course. So they don't want someone who may be antagonistic to their government. And I think that is why you see, in fact, the latest amendment to the Constitution is a bit worrisome to me personally, because
why do you say
at
that?
the end of every electioneering process, like you did mention, you have election petitions here and there. If the Constitution mandates either the president or the governor to appoint ministers and commissioners within 60 days, the Electoral Act, by virtue of the election petition tribunals, they have, I think it should be about 180 days, if I'm not mistaken, for them to start and conclude the election petitions. So what happens in the circumstance where the president-elect or the governor-elect, as the case may be, after inauguration, loses at the tribunal?
And we've seen that play out a few times.
So another 60 days for the new person in the block to begin to also appoint their commissioners and ministers, as the case may be. So however anyone looks at it, like I said, it is more or less trying to direct the mind of the government to ensure that they take governance as a serious business.
Now, talking about the business of governance, what are the consequences of not appointing your commissioners or ministers early? How does it affect the running of government?
Well, we know...
For some, I remember in the beginning of the Buhari administration, people said, oh, what do you need ministers for? There was this term called body language, that the things were working and the president was using his body language. What do you make of that? And what are the consequences of not appointing your ministers and commissioners on time? How does it affect governance?
Well, of course, let me say the consequence of not even appointing at all. Of course, I'm aware during that 2015, when there were issues surrounding non-appointment of minister within a period of time, the Constitution actually, empowers either the president or the governor to, create such offices they want to appoint, either as a commissioner, as a minister. So, but by assessing a government and its policies, it's important that every government has representative in terms of political appointee. Of course, in a system where society works or where things works, ordinarily in the absence of either the minister or the commissioner, you have permanent secretaries in respective ministries.
Civil servants,
of course, those are career civil servants who rose through the ranks of civil service to attain those positions. So this can be done with or without ministers and commissioners. In fact, what happens in reality is that more often than not, these political appointees, ministers or commissioners, do not even understand the workings of the ministries or departments they are appointed to head. So you see that it's even those permanent secretaries who have been there over the years that will put them through. And in most cases, they also put them through the wrong pattern where things are done. You have to be tutored how you have to move out money or indulge in certain activities without being caught. They have been there over the years, so they know the loopholes and they know how to circumvent some of those laws and loopholes.
Now, Kingsley, there was a flurry of bills that were presented and were signed. There's also the financial autonomy granted to state houses of assembly and judiciaries. How would it change the current system in Nigeria? And do you see it as a positive step in the right direction?
Yes, on paper, it is a positive step in the right direction, on paper. But practically, would it be allowed to fly? In the sense that we all understand how governors of each state and even the president controls virtually everything. You see in some states where even local governments will not have elections. It's more of interim, caretaker committees. I think part of the amendment also requires or provides that if you do not have a constitutionally elected chairman, you will not be entitled to allocation from the federal government. So part of this is just to tame the excesses of the state governors and the federal government. But in practice, the governors controls virtually everybody within the chairmanship position in that state. So it will be tie you to decide to do things your own way. So on paper, it is a beautiful provision, it's a beautiful amendment.
It's the executional part of it.
Exactly. So the execution of this becomes a big problem.
Now let's focus on state houses of assembly. Just yesterday or earlier this week, Father Alia, the governor-elect of Benue State, raised an alarm that, look, Benue State cannot afford these bogus pensions. There's a pension bill that has passed the first reading before the Benue State House of Assembly. And he says the state cannot afford such a jamboree. But we've seen a situation where the state's House of Assembly, almost a rubber stamp, will do the bidding of all the governors. Now, given this state assembly financial autonomy, would it make them perform their duties better and be an oversight to the state executives?
Yes, there have been clamor over the years for these state legislators to have to be autonomous in the sense that they control their own finances. The same agitation goes to judiciary. Like I said, part of this amendment and steps being taken is to ensure that money is being allocated for a certain thing, eventually used for that purpose, and not being, used without due authorization or approval. So what the governor of elect of Benue State is saying is the fact that perhaps he has seen the books of the government of Benue State and feel that part of those, provisions of the law may not be possible in the light of current economic reality. So it's still fall within his powers, his rights to decide to, do whatever is. What is more important?
But what if it's assented before the handover date?
Yeah, that becomes the law. But the question, the law does not operate in vacuum. We have to make this point. If a law says you pay A, B, or C, this kind of money per annum or per month, and the IGR or the money allocation being they receive from federal cannot cater for it. Yeah. So the Constitution is not human being, it doesn't speak. So the people that control, that implements the intention or intendments of the law. So what should be paramount is that whatever legislation or the law being made by either the state or federal government must have the face of practicality and to ensure that the implementation is also well set out.
Now, talking about implementation, and I also want you to speak to our viewers because some might not understand how the law works. We've seen these brilliant amendments that were made by the Ninth Assembly, for example, allowing states to generate electricity, generate, transmit, and distribute electricity within their territories. And also the rail system, they can have a light system. It's moving from the executive list to the concurrent. So you have a situation where the National Assembly has signed it, the President has assented to it. When does it become a universal law around the entire country? Do states houses of assemblies need to domesticate? Do they have an input in this?
No, I think with respect to the issue of management of railways, and you talked about power generation, distribution, and so on. I think it falls within the concurrent legislative list, where both the states, it was moved. It used to be in the exclusive legislative list. So part of the amendments now moved it to concurrent list, where both the states and the Federal House Assembly can legislate upon. So when that is done, it simply means that both the states can also generate, they can also have their own, indigenous companies or invite companies to come and also generate power. But of course, if you read the wordings of the law, it actually provides for those within certain catchment areas. It's not actually a universal application. Yeah, so it must be within those catchment areas as mentioned in the bill or in the act.
Now, you've often talked about, this bill is fine on paper.
Yes.
Implementation is key, and the details also. So I'm asking you, how can civil society organizations and the media, those of us in the media, ensure that these laws are implemented transparently and ensure accountability? How do we follow up?
It's by constant engagement. The the people, not just the media, but the people must constantly engage their leaders. You know, if you see the trajectory of electioneering process in 2023, it's a departure from what we used to have. The reason is because people got involved. So both the media and other civil society organizations must also interrogate the government and the governance of Nigeria. If you see the action of Mr. President in assuring that he has sent or they passed the law requiring the governors or the president-elect to appoint their ministers, it is an act of, what people must have agitated in 2015. He felt it, of course, yes. So he feels that he wouldn't want a repeat of what happened in 2015. He would want a successive government to have their people on ground at least 60 days after your inauguration so that governments will start running. So it's about engagement. Both the media, the civil society, and individuals and citizens must constantly engage and interrogate their leaders.
Now, Kingsley, from a legal point of view, what other legislative reforms would you recommend to further strengthen Nigeria's democracy and governance? What do we need? Because they always say, the judiciary is the last hope of the common man, and that these laws are there to help guide the executive and make life better for ordinary Nigerians. So from your perspective as a legal practitioner, what further legislative reforms would you like to see? What have you noticed in this last 8 years that with good laws we'll be able to, change a few things and make and improve the quality of life and governance in the country?
We have a whole lot, but I'll just single one out. I think it's very important that we have a law that requires that after every election, the election petition tribunals must be able to deliver final judgment in all the election petition disputations across Nigeria before inauguration and swearing in. We wouldn't want distraction. No, the point is that...
because you look at the case files, and sometimes it's humongous. You need to gather documents, you need time to assemble your lawyers. Would you want a situation
the amendment should also cover
yes.
both the provisions of the Electoral Act, because the Electoral Act said you must conclude within 180 days. But because of the technicalities and loopholes in our laws, lawyers also leverage on them. Because when the law says you must file within, let's say, 21 days, yes. They will wait until the 11th hour to file so that to, be able to delay. It's part of the game plan of certain lawyers. So if the law says this is the maximum, there is no minimum. So, but if it requires concerted effort of all the players.
Within the time frame you suggest, would they be able to do a thorough job? And do you think justice can be served?
Yes, the amendment should be holistic. It will also cover the evidential requirements, because the evidential requirements is where the problem is. Like someone did suggest, INEC ordinarily shouldn't be a party or be a partisan in the election petition. They should be a nominal party.
But they were dragged into it.
Yes, but if you look at their responses, it looks as if they are political parties, yes. Trying to even ask the court to make an order to, disqualify one or two persons. That shouldn't be so. They are electoral umpires.
The independence in their name should
So
speak,
ordinarily,
yes.
What they should say is that we conducted the election, whatever document you require, we present it to you, and they walk home. Whoever that wins shouldn't be their headache. So that is why I'm suggesting that part of the new amendments or innovation that we introduce in our electoral jurisprudence is that you don't swear or inaugurate anyone until the conclusion. That means that INEC will also have to conduct elections at least 6 or 8 months before the expiration of the current government to allow the election disputation to go through the usual gamut and then have a final conclusion, so that whoever that comes in at the end of the day will have a settled mind and start as quickly as possible.
But looking at the peculiarities of Nigeria, you might have a situation where, people might think you have 2 presidents at the same time. There's a president-elect that has been in waiting for a long period, like 8 months, and then you have the president of the country. How would that work?
It wouldn't have there's no issue as far as you are president-elect, you remain elected until you are inaugurated.
And sworn,
so there shouldn't be, the tenure of office is already spelled out. So you shouldn't say that you do not know that it's 4 years a term. So my point is that let them conclude all the electoral disputations before inauguration or swearing in, because it has a way of triggering a lot. If you see what has been happening since the conclusion of that election and up until now, I don't know whether the tribunal has started sitting. They were just I think yesterday or so we are inaugurated the tribunal members. So these are issues. There are several other issues, but this is key. And the essence is that there shouldn't be any distraction, because part of these laws we are saying 6 months, 60 days. If someone who was inaugurated and at the end of the perhaps maybe that 60 days you are out, another person comes, so that if you come in, you settle in.
Exactly.
You wouldn't want to have any distraction.
Yes. You won't be distracted with court cases and all of that. Now, Kingsley, the 9th National Assembly have been commended in some quarters coming up with this brilliant amendments, because Nigeria, we've had different sorts of reports, the Oronsoye reports, we've had sovereign national conferences that have recommended these things, and the recommendations just sit on top of some shelf without implementation. And with the stroke of the pen, the National Assembly has been able to, make bold steps in doing this, the 9th National Assembly. As we currently speak, there's intense lobbying for key positions for the 10th Assembly that has not even been constituted. As a Nigerian, as a patriotic Nigerian, what are your expectations for the 10th National Assembly, for the 10th Assembly? And do you believe that key positions should be zoned? Because there's this talk of zoning, it should go here, or positions should go to the most competent. Have we reached, this is our 24th year of our uninterrupted democratic experience. Have we reached that point where you could say, okay, we can start dealing with competence now and not, keeping everyone happy in their respective geopolitical zones?
Well, the point is that those who are jostling for key positions within the National Assembly are doing so for their own personal aggrandizement.
Not their geopolitical,
because what is
not
the
their
business of a legislator?
interest. Yes.
So if you are a Senate president or whatever key position you are aspiring for, does that change the law? Would that make your own, constituency to send more bills or to sponsor more bills? So these are diversionary issues that should not bother Nigerians and the citizens. It's purely parochial as far as I'm concerned. We are more interested in turning out good legislations, good laws that will usher in good governance. That is what, and that should be the key priority of every legislator. And I'm happy that we'll have a mixture of political parties coming on board in the next dispensation. It may not be business as usual. Of course, those who manage to win would attest that it's not an easy ride. So I wouldn't think they will want to sacrifice it after 4 years. So they must have to start on time to ensure that they represent, in the true sense of it, the people and mean their constituents that represent them to the National Assembly.
Now, away from the National Assembly, and we opened this conversation talking about ministers, the bill that mandates the president to name his ministers and state governors to name their commissioners within 60 days. Looking at how politics works, the intricate politics that goes on, the balancing act, and also the constitutional requirement to appoint ministers from 36 states and the FCT. How does a president coming in with his own agenda, his blueprint and policies, manage to fulfill the constitutional requirements? And also, there's also reward for support. Your party members that were with you on the campaign train and all of them. And there's also technocrats. You want to put round pegs in round holes. How difficult is it to assemble a ministerial team that would hit the ground running and do the work you promised during the campaign? What does it take to assemble such a team?
Honestly speaking, politics is not a tea party. You know, of course, for you to win an election in Nigeria is not an easy task. So more often than not, you see politicians or whoever that emerge trying to, you know, appreciate those who work for their victories, in quote. But that is beside the point. Once you're elected leader, you have a duty, if not a responsibility, to deliver on those mandates, however you want to achieve it. If you want to continue with your kinsmen or whoever that supported you, whether the person is competent or not, that is your business. So for you
and again, you're president of all of Nigeria. You're not president of your party.
Of course. So whoever, whether anybody supported you or did not support you, it shouldn't be an issue. It should be on merit and competence. You know, except perhaps you want to go to the usual practice that you have mentioned, where you must reward loyal friends and people who were instrumental to your success. But I'm saying that ideally, governance should be a serious business. It shouldn't be a business where you reward loyalists. You can go to your political parties and reward them. But whoever you are bringing on board, because whatever they do in government will have a reflection on you as a person. We are praising President Muhammadu Buhari just as we are praised those behind him. So people are praising him not necessarily because of what he said or what he did personally, but because of what those he appointed, because they are your, yes, you appointed them. Whatever they do falls back at your table. So we must get it right at this point. It is not difficult. It is not difficult to appoint credible and competent persons if you extricate yourself from politics of tribe, tongues, religion, and ethnicity. And on that fine note, it's a fine place to end the conversation. Thank you very much, Barrister Kingsley Chime, for being my guest today on the first half of this program. You're watching Politics HQ on News Central Television. Coming up.